Hello everyone, TLSG here, back again with another daily Marvel Snap video. Today we have the hot location Project Pegasus, and hot locations are going to occur in 60% of games that you play on that day. They're only in effect for 24 hours, but during that 24 hours, they are so very impactful that you typically want to build your deck around that location. And so today's location is plus 5 energy this turn, and so this can allow you to increase the curve of whatever deck you're running, because you're going to be able to play more cards more consistently. And so if you can sneak in and find a way to make this really impactful, you're going to be able to win a lot more cubes a lot more quickly. And so today's deck list, we are running a Spectrum ongoing deck list, but we have increased the curve quite a bit so that we can capitalize and use that extra 5 energy that we get from Project Pegasus to do some really cool things. And so the most notable card that I have added in here is Professor X. With Professor X, unless you can get him out onto the board early, I typically don't like running him, because on turn 5 to drop only 3 power is a little bit lackluster. But if you can drop this on turn 1, turn 2, or turn 3, and you can lock down a lane early, that allows us to kind of funnel in all of the rest of our resources into making sure that we win that one additional lane after we sneak a lane away with Professor X. And so the Spectrum ongoing deck list focuses around ongoing cards, because Spectrum's on reveal will give all of those ongoing cards plus 2 power. By deep into pool 1, we're going to have quite a few ongoing cards. Typically, we can't have all ongoing cards because the curve is so drastically high that we end up not being able to play that many cards. And so we usually tech in some other cards that are non-ongoing to lower that curve a bit. But with Project Pegasus, we can increase this. And so all of our cards are going to be ongoing cards and have various usages. I think the lower part is a little bit more self-explanatory. We can flood as many of those onto the board as possible and then buff them all up at the end of the game. What I really like is the late game power push of this deck. And so with Project Pegasus, that's going to allow us to drop a Professor X early on. If we don't get the upside, if they play a card there and they have a little bit more power than what we do, we can always drop our Klaw into the lane to the left of that Professor X location to give it an additional plus 6 power, even though we can't play the cards directly into that location. And then additionally, if we do get the early lockdown with our Professor X, we can always drop Iron Man into whatever other lane we're pushing, and that should allow us to easily lock down that lane no matter what kind of deck the opponent is running. And so that is a brief rundown of the idea of the deck. Let's go ahead and jump into a couple of games, and I'll show you how to navigate it. All right, so first up we have a good one. And the first location is Project Pegasus. So this is why we have increased the curve of our deck, because now we can drop Professor X on turn 1. A card that is typically not very good this early on is going to potentially allow us to lock down and win a lane on the very first turn. And so they did end up dropping an Iron Man on the first slot, but our Professor X is going to lock down the far right lane before they even have a chance to play in there. And so now all it comes down to is trying to lock down and win this other lane. And so to do that, we have Iron Man, we have Cosmo to make sure that they're not going to be able to Enchantress our Iron Man. We have a really, really good shot at winning this one. So I went ahead and snapped as soon as we saw that the Atlantis lane kind of popped off or locked in. I went ahead and snapped because at that point we've locked down in one location. Now they probably have locked down in the far left location, but because of the Iron Man, we're going to play away from it. It looks like they're running an ongoing deck as well. And so with that, we're going to be able to stack our Iron Man. And we did draw into our Spectrum. So it looks like I think we're just going to go with a Lizard instead of a Punisher. I don't think they're going to push more than 3 cards here. I think they're going to run out of space and run out of steam. So I'm going to push our Lizard first and foremost. That way we have a pretty decent power push. If they do fill it out, we're going to have our Iron Man. Spectrum is going to trigger and give all of these plus 2 power. And so we're going to have a pretty big upside from it. So they did actually push a little bit more power there than I thought they were going to. I thought they were going to cap out the Ruins location much earlier on. And so we can either do a Klaw, and they retreated. It took them a while. I'm surprised it took them as long as it did. We could have done a Klaw if it looked like this was going to be close, or they might be able to push power over there somehow. Otherwise, we could have done an Iron Man. We could have done our Spectrum or even a Klaw to push more power over here. And it should have, by locking down a lane on turn 1, it's very, very hard for them to come back and win the other 2. And so let's go ahead and jump over into the next one. All right, so next up we have Ant, and the first location is Tinker's Workshop. So we get 1 extra energy, but not the Project Pegasus extra 5. But We do draw into armor, so we're at least going to be able to drop a card on that first turn. Ooh, they drop 2, so maybe they're running a zoo deck list? If so, that's kind of brave. Running a zoo deck list whenever you have such a large like push in potential energy, and hot locations occur so much more frequently that it's almost always worth building to that location, because we're going to see that in 60% of our games today, the Project Pegasus location, and so it's advantageous to build your deck around it because it's going to come up so often. And so the last location is Project Pegasus. If we drew into a Professor X, that would be perfect. We don't quite draw into it, so it really comes down to where do we think we're going to need maybe an extra power push with our Klaw. We have some of our lower cost cards, so our 3s and our 2s, but I think we start with a Klaw. And we're going to go ahead and push it into Tinker's Workshop. I think they're going to try to like halfway compete there, and maybe we can persuade them to kind of abandon that location. So the Klaw is going to push 6 power into Limbo. They do have their Khazar, potentially they potentially also have a Blue Marvel. Maybe they've increased their curve into including an Onslaught, so that they can really like amplify and lean in on those cards and those abilities. If not, we've increased our curve pretty heavily. We're going to have pretty much all ongoing cards that once we get a Spectrum, especially with it extending to turn 7 and us getting the extra 5 energy from Project Pegasus, we're going to have a lot of cards that are going to be impacted by that Spectrum at the end of the game. If we can draw into an Iron Man, that's going to help us really lock down and solidify either the far left or the middle location. And it really depends on what else they're running. This looks like a pretty standard zoo, and I honestly think we're going to be able to outpower them in that. So let's go with a Colossus in the middle. Let's go with a Cosmo into the far left. And then we're going to see what we draw into. Maybe we draw into Professor X so that we can kind of sneak away and lock down this one. Ooh, they skip on turn 5. If we were in pool 2, I would be worried about a potential Infinite, but we're not. And so I'm not. But it's just kind of, it's interesting that they didn't play anything last turn. They're probably going to have a big final turn where they can flood just about all of their power onto the board, and with that, I think it's fine. They can do an Onslaught here, which would amplify this, but with our Spectrum, this is going to be plus 8 power into this lane. We're going to have plus 5 power into this one. We get the Professor X just a turn too late. Otherwise, we would have like locked down this one or liked to lock down this one. But I think we go with a Spectrum that'll give this a little bit of extra power. It'll give this lane quite a bit, and this lane a pretty big boost as well. And so they're going to flood the board with a lot of low one-cost cards. Maybe they do a strong guy and a couple of one-cost cards. I think we can beat their power push. I think we can, because we didn't have to skip any of our turns, and we never ran out of juice, we never ran out of power, we never ran out of tempo. Because of that, we're going to be able to kind of continue and snowball that, and hopefully be able to outpower the consistent power push of a Khazar Zoo. They might end up retreating if they're not able to find a way to lay out their cards just right. And okay, nope, so they lean in. And so they do play into Limbo, they play into Tinker's Workshop, so we should win the Project Pegasus lane without much issue. I think we win Tinker's Workshop as well. They really didn't push that much power onto the board on that final turn. So the Onslaught into the far left lane is questionable, because they don't have any ongoing cards here. It would have made more sense to play it into the Khazar lane. But even that, I don't think they would have won the Limbo lane. They would have lost Project Pegasus. We would have won Tinker's Workshop. So either way, we would have won 2 out of 3, even if they hadn't pushed their power in this direction. They have they have the premium avatar, so I don't think they're a bot, but that doesn't seem like a very solid last turn play. Let's jump over into the next one. All right, and so next up we have Fabulousing. And the first location is Gamma Lab. I don't know that we even try to lean into it. I mean, yes, we will. And so they don't play anything on turn 1. Maybe they put a really high energy curve into their cards, or maybe they're, I don't know, playing Angela first. If this is Project Pegasus, perfect. What we can do is try to sneak away one of these other 2 lanes. That way we can have the win condition. I think we try to lock down the Project Pegasus lane. I think they will most likely flood cards into Gamma Lab. But on the off chance that they don't, and they push more cards into Muir Island than we do, I think it's going to be more beneficial for us to try to lock down Project Pegasus. Let's go ahead and snap. I think we're pretty likely to be able to lock this one down, and even if not, we have Klaw to push an additional 6 power over there. We can buff it up even further with our Spectrum, and so we get a lot of advantage in being able to try to lock down locations with the Project Pegasus lane, especially being able to lock it down on turns 1 through 3 is insanely advantageous. Okay, and so they do flood the Gamma Lab location. We get the lockdown on Project Pegasus. We have our Cosmo and Muir Island, so we're going to be able to guarantee that they can't use an Enchantress or anything similar. We can drop an armor. On turn 5, we can do our Iron Man. And that's going to multiply any of the +1 power bonuses that we get each turn so that we can capitalize on it more than what they can. Now, they do obviously lock down and win the Gamma Lab, but I don't think they're going to have the push to reach into Project Pegasus. And so they snapped back, which is kind of surprising, but we'll see. They dropped Jessica Jones. If they let that trigger, they're not going to be able to drop anything this turn. So our Iron Man is going to multiply. Actually, no, their Jessica Jones on reveal won't trigger because we had Cosmo in place. So we're going to go ahead and drop Iron Man. We're not going to be able to drop Spectrum into that middle location, but that's absolutely fine. We're going to be able to... Okay, so they have a Devil Dino. Interesting. And so maybe they have an Iron Man as well. That would push them up to about 40 power. If we go with a Spectrum, that is going to push us to 246. That's going to be an extra 12, which will push us to 38. We will retain that Muir Island bonus and get double it as well. And so, yeah, they do come back down and retreat after they see that the Iron Man came down. So I'm guessing they didn't have as big of a power push as they thought they were going to. But that is why we tech our deck for kind of that much higher curve, because with a hot location, you're going to see it so frequently that it's going to be in your favor to build your deck around that one. Now, a featured location, maybe not so much, but the hot location, you're going to see it so much, and it's going to be so impactful to have those specific cards in your deck. So locking down a lane with Professor X lets us focus all of our attention into one other lane, because at that point, all we need to win is that one additional lane. And so with that, we are going to go ahead and end the video here. I hope that you guys enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to leave it a like and a comment down below. As always, this has been TLSG. Later, guys.